Welcome to the debate. Today we are conducting a forensic audit of a legacy. We're looking at a very specific multi-generational case study in land stewardship, specifically the Sand River property. We have 65 years of history here, right, from 1961 to the present. And the objective today is to determine how a family legacy actually survives into the third generation. Is it through the rigorous acquisition of assets, legal trusts, and harvest data? Or is it, as some might suggest, merely a byproduct of unscripted chaos and campfire folklore?
We shall see. I do want to frame this discussion specifically for the younger generation of the family, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Right. Because there are members of this lineage listening right now who may have never walked the North 40 or even sat in the Sand River Hilton. Exactly. So, this discussion serves as an orientation to your heritage. The central question we are tackling is this: is the Sand River legacy defined by the tangible success of the hunt, the foresight of the founders, and the legal structures that preserve the land? Or is it defined by the chaotic, unscripted human moments that occurred between the shots? I will be representing the structuralist view. The Sand River story is, at its core, one of calculated risk and smart execution.
And I am taking the position that those structures are just the backdrop. The true soul of Sand River lies in the comedy of errors, the reliance on local rumors over official channels, and what we might call the Hilton culture, a culture that prioritized camaraderie over efficiency. The legacy isn't the land, it's the laughter.
Well, if we look at the foundation, it begins with the 1961 acquisition. This was a triumph of due diligence led by Clarence R. Moore, C.R. Moore, and Dwayne Cuss. We are talking about locating tax-delinquent property for $1 per acre plus the timber value. And this continues through disciplined record-keeping, culminating in the Cuss family irrevocable trust in 1997. These aren't just boring paperwork. They're the skeletal system of this history. Without the trust, without the harvest management, there is no campfire to sit around.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy the master plan narrative. Let me tell you why. If you look at the actual origin story, it wasn't strategic foresight. It was an accident. The acquisition wasn't smart planning. It was pure luck based on a tip from a stranger because a state park was too full. And if you look at the defining experiences, they aren't the trophy bucks. They are the disasters. They are the 1963 Great Shootout, where bullets were literally flying past John Godava's ears. They are the frozen tractors. For the young audience listening, the harvest logs are just numbers on a page. The stories of mishaps, like the apple cart confession, those are the actual inheritance.
That is a very romantic way to look at it. But let's strip away the romance and look at the logistics for a moment. You call the origin story luck. I call it agile execution. Let's look at the facts of 1960. Dune Cuss and John Godava pack up the yellow Ford station wagon. Their plan? To hunt St. Croix State Park.
Exactly, that was the plan. And it failed immediately.
It encountered friction.
Friction? They got there and the line of cars was backed up out of sight. It was overcrowding, plain and simple. They did not have a backup plan. They met a random hunter, a total stranger, who told them to try the land just outside the park. They were improvising. If that line at the park hadn't been so long, the Sand River property never happens. The legacy began with a traffic jam, not a spreadsheet.
Sure, I see the narrative appeal of the traffic jam theory, but you are completely ignoring the immediate pivot to professionalism. They didn't just wander into the woods and squat based on a rumor. They engaged C.R. Moore. In early 1961, Moore didn't rely on rumors. He went to the Pine County authorities. He specifically searched for tax-delinquent property. And this is the key insight for the younger listeners. Wealth is often found in what others neglect. He secured the South 40 in 1961 for $40. $40, plus the timber value of $175, which, even adjusted for inflation, is an absolute steal. But you have to admit, relying on a stranger's tip regarding the geographic location was a massive gamble.
It's opportunistic, yes, but it required the diligence to file the paperwork. Then they secured the North 40 in 1962. That is due diligence. That is securing the asset. Even the name, Sand River, shows a desire to map and define the territory, even if the geography was slightly ambitious.
Ambitious is a very generous word. Wrong is the accurate one. Dwayne Coos named it Sand River because they dipped a cup in the water and drank from it, proudly filming the momentous occasion on 8mm film. They looked at a map, pointed and said, "This is Sand River." In reality, they were at Partridge Creek. The actual Sand River is a quarter-mile south. The very name of the property, the name on the Hilton itself, is based on a map reading error. It perfectly illustrates my point. The official geography clashes with the family lore, and the lore won out. We don't call it the Partridge Creek property, do we?
We do not. But I would argue the name represents aspiration rather than a coordinate. It represents the idea of the wilderness they acquired. It was about claiming a space. But let's move from the map to the experience of the hunt itself. You mentioned the 1963 Great Shootout. I know you view this as a highlight reel moment, but when I look at the logs and the forensic recount, I see a lack of discipline that luckily didn't end in tragedy.
Oh, you have to embrace the chaos of 1963. This is the stuff legends are made of. This defines the human element for any young family member listening who thinks their ancestors were perfect stoic marksmen. Don Cush puts a new scope on his Remington 30-06. He and John are in the woods. Don sees a doe. He fires. He misses. He fires again.
5 times. He emptied the entire magazine.
Exactly. And John Gadava, the co-founder of this legacy, is literally hitting the dirt. Because, as he told it later, bullets were zipping past his ears. Can you imagine? The co-founder almost took friendly fire in year 3. And then we have the forensic absurdity of the two-angled doe.
I am familiar with the report. It defies physics.
They finally find the deer. It has 2 holes in it, but the entry wounds suggest shots coming from 2 completely different directions. It's a physical impossibility unless the deer was spinning like a top or there was a second shooter on a grassy knoll. It's funny, it's tragic, it is deeply human. That story tells the younger generation more about their ancestors, their fallibility, their excitement, the buck fever, than any sterile harvest statistic ever could. It humanizes the founders.
I am not convinced by that line of reasoning because it elevates near negligence to mythology. If you want to talk about what actually defined the group, what forged the character necessary to keep this land for 6 decades, you have to look at 1964, the skunked year.
The year nothing happened? You're choosing the most boring year on record to make your point.
I am choosing the year resilience was forged. 1964 was the first time in the property's history that no deer were taken. 0. It was cold, overcast, and the woods were dead quiet. No bullet zipping, no excitement, just cold failure. Don later said, and I quote, "If you can't handle a season with no deer, you don't deserve the ones that come after." That is the structuralist view. That is the discipline required to maintain a legacy. The 1963 shootout was a funny story, sure, but 1964 proved they were serious hunters, not just lucky amateurs. They came back in 1965. They didn't quit. That persistence is why the trust exists today.
That is a fair point about resilience, but resilience without joy is just labor, and the joy comes from the absurdity. Let's talk about the metrics of success. You want to focus on the harvest stats as the ultimate metric, the ultimate KPI of the property. I say the metrics of success are the characters and the camp culture.
But the harvest proves the method. You cannot ignore the data. Don Cuss was known as the meat man for a reason. In the first decade alone, from 1961 to 1970, he harvested 13 daws. He was feeding the family. That is the primary metric of a hunting camp. Protein acquisition. Then you have John Gadava. He wasn't just shooting for fun. He was hunting trophies. The 1973 great white buck, that ghost-like 10-pointer with the white antlers, that justified the effort.
But the great white buck is a story first. It's a ghost story that turned out to be real. It just adds to the mystique.
It is a data point that proves the quality of the herd management. And look at how they adapted. In 1973, Minnesota shifted to bucks-only regulations. The group didn't complain. They adapted their strategy professionally. They shifted from steady doe harvest to long, patient sits. And fast forward to 2002, Doug Smith shoots a doe, and the record's noted as the 100th deer harvested on the property. That is a statistical milestone that validates the entire project. 100 deer. That is tangible success.
See, I come at it from a completely different angle. The 100th deer is just a number on a page. Do you know what people actually remember? They remember the F-12 Farmall tractor.
The tractor that broke down constantly, the asset that was an active liability.
The tractor. That was a character. Dune bought it to clear trails, sure. In 1965, they had 2 does down, and they used the F-12 to haul them. Success. But in 1967, the clutch froze solid. Now, for the technical audience, and especially the young ones who have never operated a manual clutch, this wasn't a simple fix. They had to jack up the rear wheel, spin it by hand to crank the engine, and slam it into gear just to get it moving. It was held together by duct tape and hope. That tractor is more beloved in the family memory than any single deer Dune ever shot. It represents the struggle. And speaking of beloved characters, what about Bob Jensen?
Bob Jensen was a capable hunter. It's recorded in the logs.
Bob Jensen was a comedian who happened to carry a rifle. His legacy isn't the spike buck he shot in '67. His legacy, as explicitly recorded in the family history, is his unique, let's call it a musical talent. His ability to fart the Star-Spangled Banner in B-flat.
I hardly think that qualifies as legacy.
It is explicitly in the records. That is the memory that makes the grandkids laugh 50 years later. That is the human element that bonds a group together. If it were just about meat, they could have gone to the grocery store. They came for the show Bob Jensen put on. They came for the camaraderie. It's the unfiltered humanity that makes the place special.
I will concede that morale is important for unit cohesion, but morale doesn't maintain the property lines. Let's talk about the apple cart confession of 1991. You likely view this as a charming story of mischief. I view it as a breakdown in logistics and direct insubordination.
It is the absolute perfect example of camp culture. And it's a great lesson for the cousins listening today. Todd and Jerry, the younger generation at the time, were tasked with hauling a heavy cart of apples deep into the woods to the graveyard stand to bait the deer. It was heavy, the snow was deep, they were tired. So what did they do? They dumped the apples in the creek halfway there and lied about it.
They falsified the report.
They committed the perfect crime. They kept that secret for decades until the 1991 season when they finally confessed. That mischief, that shared secret between cousins, that is what binds a generation. It's the rebellion against the work of the camp that makes it fun. It proves that the younger generation was carving out their own experience even if it was slightly illicit.
And yet, I must point out, if everyone dumped the apples in the creek, the deer wouldn't be at the stand, and the harvest stats would drop. The system relies on people doing the work, even if they complain about it. Which brings us to the ultimate question of structure. You talk about the founders, Don and John, as these romantic figures of friendship, and they were. But the transition from their era to the modern era required cold, hard legal maneuvering.
I disagree. The era of the Founding Fathers, from 1961 to 1985, was built on a handshake. John Godava and Don Kuss were partners. When the service station closed, John sold his share to Don in 1985. But the agreement was simple. John stays, John hunts forever. It wasn't about contracts, it was about little Johnny burgers, those massive burgers he cooked, and cinnamon bread, and friendship. That emotional bond is the foundation.
Emotional bonds are volatile. They die with the individuals, unfortunately. Legal structures survive. The defining moment of Sand River wasn't the handshake. It was the 1997 trust. And I want the listeners to really understand the brilliance of this move. Look at the context. Carlson Timber wanted access to the landlocked 80 acres behind the property.
Right, this was the corporate encroachment.
It was an opportunity. Dawn and Arla didn't just say yes, they negotiated. They allowed the road in exchange for purchasing that logged land for $200 an acre. They doubled the estate to 160 acres. And then, crucially, they created the Kassam Family Irrevocable Trust.
It sounds very corporate. Irrevocable trust. It sounds like a bank.
It is protective armor. The trust ensures the land cannot be sold off piece by a wayward cousin who needs quick cash. It protects the North 40 and the South 40 for the grandchildren listening to this. Without that paperwork in 1997 and the subsequent GPS mapping of stands like Sears Tower and poachers in 2008, this land would likely have been liquidated when the founders passed. The trust turned a hobby into an institution. It removed the human error element from ownership.
That is a compelling argument. I will grant you that. The mechanism is impressive. But have you considered that the trust only matters because the people want to go back? And they want to go back because of the stories. You mentioned the 2008 GPS mapping. That's technology. But what happened in 2008 that people actually talk about? That was the year Dwayne Kuss was essentially exiled from Tanks Bar.
That was a logistical failure of the restaurant, not the hunt.
But it's the story they tell. The group had grown so big, because of the success you mentioned, that when they went to the local bar for burgers, the kitchen couldn't handle the order. They were told not to come back. It's hilarious. Just like in 2011, World War III, you have the record showing 3 deer down in minutes. A great statistical day. But the story is the chaos. Josh, Jeremy, and Duan all shooting at a group of deer at twilight. Josh shooting a deer, thinking it's a new one, and realizing he's just shooting the same dead deer again. The seek, clean, and drag exercise in the dark with four-wheeler headlights. That chaos is the glue. The trust provides the land, but the chaos provides the reason to return.
I think we are reaching a synthesis here. I am willing to acknowledge that the Hilton culture, the camaraderie, the Johnny Burgers, the stories of bullets flying, even the apple cart deception is the fuel. It provides the energy. But the trust, the harvest logs, the bucks-only discipline, that is the engine. You can have all the fuel in the world, but without the engine of the trust, you go nowhere.
And I will admit, without Don Kuss being the meat man and filling the freezer, and without C.R. Moore finding that tax-delinquent land in '61, there would be no stage for Bob Jensen to perform his unique anthem.
Exactly. The stage must be built before the play can be performed. So for the younger generation listening, you have a dual inheritance. You inherit the discipline of the harvest logs and the legal protection of the trust. That is your responsibility to maintain. You cannot let the paperwork lapse.
But you also inherit the right to make mistakes. You inherit the right to get skunked, the right to freeze your clutch, and the right to dump the apple cart in the creek, as long as you eventually confess to it. You inherit the fun.
There is a quote from the 65th anniversary reflection that I think captures this duality perfectly. We came for the deer, but we stayed for each other.
That really sums it up. Whether it's the 1963 bullets flying or the 1997 legal documents, both were necessary. You need the structure to survive the bad years so you can be there for the funny years.
Indeed, the legacy of Sand River is a marriage of the ledger and the lore. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of history.
It's been a pleasure to walk the North 40 with you, figuratively speaking.
And to our listeners, specifically the next generation of the Kuss family, the trust has preserved the land. The rest of the story, the next chapter of errors and triumphs, is now up to you to write. Welcome to the legacy.